Here we go, the collapse of the Soviet Union. Okay, first of all, just a little recap on the events that we talked about last class and the last video of those events leading to peace. By the end of the 1980s, so while Afghanistan and the Soviet Union war is still going on, President Reagan and the USSR Premier Gorbachev had made significant gains towards peace, which all started at the Geneva Summit in 1985, right after Gorbachev comes to power. So these are those talks. The Geneva Summit starts talks for the next 4 years that bring us closer and closer to peace, even though there aren't really very many specifics established at the Geneva Summit. So both countries are open to the idea of peace in 1989, and so they had agreed to several of those drastic arms reduction treaties, limiting both superpowers' military capability. This is a big deal because now we're starting to think that defeat is not the ultimate goal of the Cold War. It's not just to contain or spread communism. We can live in a world where both things exist. Within the USSR, Gorbachev was sort of slipping in his control. So the Soviet Union is spending tons of money putting down revolts all over the place with an iron fist, protecting its borders, and the war in Afghanistan and keeping up with the US in the arms race is really sucking out its funds. The Soviets were spending a quarter of their national income, or their gross national product, which is their GNP. That is all the money produced in a country. 25% of that was going to the arms race, whereas in the United States, only 7% of our GNP was spent on the arms race. So we were spending much less money on the arms race, and they were really trying to keep up with us. Plus, they were involved in a war, and we were not directly. The USSR and the included Soviet satellites were home to so much poverty, and the citizens had very little power or control over their government or economy because they couldn't vote, they didn't have very many individual freedoms, and overall their economy wasn't doing super well. And remember, the government controls all the businesses, so when businesses are doing well, the citizens might not see as much of a profit as they might in a capitalist country. So they're not too happy here. So Gorbachev, once he takes power in 1985, he initiates 2 reforms. The first one is known as perestroika, and this is called restructuring, or this is known as perestroika because that refers to the restructuring process that changed the economic policies within the USSR. So now the USSR allows competition between businesses. So no more just that one state product that the state produces and all of that product look the same. Now different companies within the state can produce different products. So you might have 2 different brands of shoes, and so people can compete, those 2 brands can compete for what the public or the consumer wants. So that's based on consumer demand. So the businesses, instead of being supported through government funds, they now had to pay for themselves through profit. So this is much more like a capitalist model, but the state is still providing a lot of public services that in a capitalist economy we don't provide. So this is more moving towards socialism and away from true communism. The second thing that happens is known as glasnost, and this means openness. This is ending the corruption in government. They said that they would no longer punish people for just disagreeing with the government. Instead, they would welcome open debate within government. So if you didn't agree with what was happening, you didn't have to just say yes sir and follow the leader. You could now speak up about the corruption going on and about different ideas you had for Russia if you were within the government, and you wouldn't automatically be thrown in jail. So these are good things. So Gorbachev's reforms have several effects. Many people, one of the things that happens after these reforms, many people who were imprisoned for disagreeing with the USSR were then released. So this is kind of shocking. A lot more people in the public are dissenting with the government. People are allowed to buy and sell for profit because of perestroika. This is the first time they've been able to do this in 60 years. So they're a little bit more economically motivated, economically empowered. And once Gorbachev allowed the freedom of speech, the media and the people openly said that they wanted rid of communism. They were felt free enough that they could speak up about how much they hated communism, especially in the Soviet satellites in Eastern Europe. And because they were able to speak up about that, they started to form other political parties as opposed to just the Communist Party. That was the only political party allowed under communism, and now other political parties are starting to be formed. So by March of 1989, Gorbachev has told the other communist leaders that the Red Army would no longer individually protect them. So he's pulling military funds spent on protecting the leadership in order to kind of spread the funds around a little bit better and more efficiently so that that 25% could get a little bit lower. And so these reforms overall sparked political change in Soviet satellites such as Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, the country of Georgia, Czechoslovakia, and Hungary. So these political parties that start forming, maybe they don't like their government as much. There might be some ideas of nationalism in these countries. They start to form once Gorbachev's reforms spread throughout the USSR. Because remember, the USSR is the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, so it's lots of countries plus Russia that make up the USSR. So these other countries start to change their minds a little bit. First checkpoint. What event opened up conversations between Reagan and Gorbachev? What were Gorbachev's two main reforms, and what did they do? Why did revolts occur in those Soviet satellites in 1989? Why did they not occur previously? So what changed? Okay, backing up a little bit, before we talk about how the Berlin Wall falls, we need to talk about how it got there. So just a reminder, Berlin is split into East and West. The East is controlled by the Soviets, and the West is controlled by the Allied powers after World War II. The city of Berlin is completely situated in East Germany, which is under Soviet control. So Germany was split up into 4 parts, and Berlin was split up into 4 parts, and the west side of Berlin is completely surrounded by Soviet powers. So in 1961, the Berlin Wall is constructed by East Berlin to keep the East Berliners from escaping into West Berlin. Berliners hated living under communism. Think about their context. They had been under an imperial power until World War I. And then after that, they were in a democracy, that Weimar Republic, if you remember that, in the 1930s. That's what Hitler overthrew. And then they were under very, very strict fascist government. And that was not good either. So they have been through a lot. Even if you're 50 years old in 1961, you have seen 4 different types of governments. So they hated living under communism. So they would escape to West Berlin, which was free Berlin and much less totalitarian because it was controlled by the Allied powers, France, Britain, and America. So a 103-mile wall was built, and all of those miles were guarded by Soviet troops. So as communist governments are being overthrown all over Eastern Europe, demonstrations by people prompted the government to remove border crossing restrictions. So they just wanted this little bit of freedom in Berlin. So they see these little revolutions happening all over Eastern Europe, and they start to do the same thing. So the announcement is made that they do remove the border crossing restrictions from East Berlin into West Berlin. And so East and West Berliners climbed over the wall and celebrated. On November 9th, 1989, the Berlin Wall, the ultimate symbol of communism, was destroyed. And Ronald Reagan, you can see in the top corner picture, he gives this speech where he says, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall." And it's very famous. And that's when the wall starts to come down between East and West Berlin. So shortly after the Berlin Wall fell, Germany is reunited as one country. So there's no more West Germany and East Germany. It's just all one German republic, and it's a democracy, much like the other countries of Western Europe. And this happens on October 3rd, 1990. Checkpoint number 2. Okay, the collapse of the Soviet Union. So right after Germany's unified, 3 Baltic states declare their independence from the USSR officially. So even though there were revolts in Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, they officially declare their independence in 1990. By 1991, many more countries had declared their independence, and the Soviet Union was officially broken up into individual countries by this point. Very few countries remained in the actual Soviet Union. So by August of 1991, hardline communists led a coup, remember that means an overthrow, against Gorbachev. They saw him as ineffective at stopping the fall of communism after all these countries had declared their independence. So they wanted him out. So Boris Yeltsin, who's the new president of the Russian Republic, so just of Russia as a part of the Soviet Union, led a demonstration against the coup, so against the people who were against the government. Therefore, he was seen as a hero. So he went on and disbanded the Soviet Communist Party. He realized that communism was not working for Russia and the Soviet Union anymore. Then he formally ends the USSR in December of 1991. So in just three or 4 months, it goes from a coup overthrowing Gorbachev that was unsuccessful to the Soviet Union being completely dissolved. So Gorbachev resigns as Soviet president, and the red flag, the flag of communism, that's that red flag with the sickle and hammer, was lowered from the Kremlin, which is like their Capitol building, for the last time. Yeltsin becomes the first president of the Russian Federation, which is the new name for the Commonwealth formed out of the 3 countries remaining in the Soviet Union. So that's still what Russia is called today, is the Russian Federation. It's technically the name of Russia. So he's the first president of this new country that he forms after the USSR collapses. So this map is just kind of a summary of everything we just talked about, and you can see how these revolts kind of spread from east to west until eventually the Soviet Union is dissolved in December of 1991. So this is all those different countries that were part of the Soviet Union, all the way from East Germany, Hungary, Slovakia, Yugoslavia, which is where Serbia is, Ukraine, Moldova, all those Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and then the Soviet Union finally collapses. Alrighty, last checkpoint. And once you're done with this checkpoint, you are done with the video.